13 Tales Told by a Dubliner by Turlough Conmee. Story number 13. In the Foggy Dew. When I was a young fella, I went out for a drive the week after Easter with me father in the Dublin Mountains. We stopped and went walking on a road across the Featherbed. As we walked along that little road, for that was what it was, overlooking a deep glen, I saw a mist that was beginning to roll in from the other side of the mountain. It was striking because I could see it creeping towards us, slowly, across the Featherbed, and we were walking towards it. Something told me to turn back before the mist engulfed me, but something else told me to go on. Me father noticed the rolling bank of whitish mist, but it seemed not to bother him, so on we went. After a while, the mist did engulf me, and I couldn't see a thing ahead of me. The road itself seemed to have just become an unpaved track. I could no longer see me father. I walked on, completely lost as it seemed, and now worried in mind. After another while, I saw a figure coming towards me. Was it me father? I felt some relief, but I realised soon enough it was a woman. We stopped as we faced one another. She was dressed in a long black cloak. "Why have you come here?" she said to me. "Don't you know that you're lost?" "Show me the way," says I. "Show the way? I can show you my way." "Well, show it to me then, if it gets me somewhere." "You are somewhere," she said. "Where?" "The Foggy Dew," says she. "You've heard of the Foggy Dew, I suppose. It used to be called draíochta. Whatever you call it, it's not of this world. People want to see by the clear light of day. But what I offer, because it's my mist, is darkness at midday, because that's the truth. What you see in the Foggy Dew is more real than what you see in the daytime. Now they say there's nothing new under the sun. That's as may be, but this isn't under the sun, is it? This is wrapped in a mist, and so you see things you never saw before." "And who might you be, that you say it's your mist?" "I'm the Banshee, as you guessed." "Are you mortal woman, or are you airy spirit?" I asked her. "Both of them things," says she. "I am eternal, and I know all about the past of Ireland, but I know about the present too, and about the future, and the things your heart is yearning for." "Show me these things then," I urged her. "Show you," she repeated. She extended her arms, looking ahead, and she chanted, "Show his eyes and grieve his heart, come like shadows, so depart." And following this, I saw 3 wonders. The first was a wooden longhouse, like people made long ago. There was light inside. It streamed out from a door where the covering of animal skins had been drawn aside. We went and looked in at the open door. In the central hearth, a log fire was burning. The flames illuminated something standing on the floor. It was a loom, a great primitive loom made of branches and sticks. But there was no weaver there. All was silent, except for the crackling of the wood on the fire. We turned aside from there and went on. The next thing I saw was an oak tree, standing on its own in the mist. It seemed impossible that it should be there, but it was. There had hardly been a tree on the Featherbed for hundreds of years. The third thing I saw, but I heard it first. I heard the galloping of hooves in the distance, and then I saw a horse and rider coming out of the mist. The horse was a pale horse, and the rider was a tall man with long dark hair streaming in the wind behind him. The gallop passed and were gone. What, I asked, are the meaning of them things that I have seen? They all weave themselves into a story, said the Banshee. And she began to tell the story. Once there were two Viking brothers. Their names were Ospak and Brodir. They commanded ships and men. They lived on the Isle of Man. Brodir had always been very concerned with the supernatural world and hidden things, and finally he had become a Christian. He had seen how the Irish priests and monks there were miraculously protected from harm, and how they worked wonders. He had gone to one of them finally and said, "I want to belong to this Christ." He had been baptized and confirmed. He had studied and had even been ordained a deacon, so that he donned a dalmatic and assisted the priest at Mass, it being his prerogative to read aloud the Gospel for the day. On feast days throughout the year, he could now be seen reading the Gospel to the assembled faithful, both Irish and Norse, under the Gospel Oak, which was a special holy tree at the edge of the parish where they lived. He had learned to intone the Latin solemnly and well, in such a way that one could see that he understood what he was saying and was reflecting on it. He was on his way to becoming a priest. Yet Brodir was a warrior, from a long line of Viking warriors, and as he read the Gospel accounts, he could not fathom the idea of this God-man who went to his death uncomplaining, carrying his cross, and dying nailed to a tree on Good Friday. Jesus told Nicodemus, "As Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up." Brodir had learned how that was to be interpreted. When the people of Israel in the desert were plagued by serpents, Moses took a figure of a serpent and wound it around a stake or cross, and put it where everyone in the camp of the Israelites could see it. Anyone bitten by the poisonous serpents just had to turn to the serpent wound around the stake, look at it, and he would be magically healed. Jesus is saying that in the same way he himself is going to be raised up, nailed to a cross, where everyone can gaze on his suffering and his death, and then they'll be saved from their sins. This saying of Jesus referred to another one from the Old Testament. They will look upon him whom they have pierced. Now, Brodir could not accept this. This was not the way of a warrior. As a warrior, you didn't let your enemies kill you. They might kill you in a fair fight, but that would bring glory both to you and them. But you did not surrender to them and let them kill you any way they pleased. That would only encourage them to make your suffering greater. Yet this Jesus said that if someone struck you in the face on one cheek, you should offer him the other cheek to strike too. That was folly. The thought of it made his blood boil within him. The upshot of it was that he forsook the new faith and went back to the old. Its sorcery was more powerful, he said. He told the priest that he would come no more on Sundays, and went back to his men who were encamped around the bay, with their ships riding at anchor or beached. His brother Ospak was there too, surrounded by his own men. He looked up as Brodir appeared among the sandhills, striding towards the sea. He went to meet him, and they walked along the seashore, alone. "So, me brother," said Ospak, "you're back with us. What does this mean?" "I have given up the new way of life, the Christian way. I will return to the way of our ancestors." Ospak looked at him. "You know, I have never gone for this new way. I followed the old way, and I know no other, so you'll get no blame from me." He smiled a little. Brodir smiled kind of ruefully, and the brothers embraced. "But you look troubled, me brother," went on Ospak, "as if it has not been easy for you. Was there a quarrel? Did you have harsh words with the Irish priests?" "No, no," said Brodir, shaking his head impatiently. "There was no quarrel. I left them to their books and prayers, and that was that." "So what is it that troubles you so?" Brodir sighed. "I thought this new way was the right way, the way of the future for all of us, even maybe for you, me brother. I tried hard to adopt it. You saw the way I studied the books and learned the Latin." Ospak nodded. "But I just could not stomach the dying on the cross. How can a god die like that? It's unworthy." "I never understood it myself," said Ospak softly. "I suppose it must be something like when Odin hung for 9 days and 9 nights upside down from the ash tree of the world until he gained wisdom." "This is different," said Brodir, shaking his head sadly. "He died. Christ died. Then they say he rose again in glory. Have you ever seen a man rise from the dead?" "No, not a man. Only a god could do it." "Well, god or man, I can't accept that he dies voluntarily, like a sacrificial victim, like a lamb to the slaughter. The only good man is a warrior, and a warrior lives and dies with a sword in his hand. He may go down to defeat sometime, but he dies fighting. Where's the glory otherwise?" He had raised his voice in anger and disappointment. Ospak just looked at him. They went back together to the encampment. Ospak to his men, Brodir to his. Ospak was counted the wisest of men. When his brother had become a Christian, he was troubled. When he gave up the new faith, he was more troubled still. He couldn't imagine what was tormenting his brother. He resolved to watch him and see what he would do. Brodir was a fine figure of a man. He had jet black hair. Now he let it grow. Soon his black hair was so long it hung down to his waist. He had to tuck it into his belt. The Christian people shook their heads. So did the priests. They told the people the story of Absalom and his long hair being caught in an oak as he rode, so that David's men could pierce him with darts and spears. But David wept when he heard that his son was killed. Brodir had acquired a coat of mail that made him invincible, the Vikings said. No matter how you hacked at it with swords, the blade bounced off and made no dent in the armour. They knew about this because he spent long hours getting back into practice and fighting mock battles with them. One day, a ship appeared on the horizon, coming from Ireland. It was a Norse ship. When it came into port, it was announced that Sitric, King of Dublin, was here. He lost no time in going to see the two brothers. They sat together that evening around the campfire near the shore. Sitric was a young man. He was the son of a Viking chief and an Irish princess, Gormlaith, who was still famed for her beauty. Young Sitric was a handsome young man, with a modest charm that pleased men. He was nicknamed Silkenbeard because of his fine fair beard. The Norsemen of Dublin had elected him to be king over them. He lived there with his mother Gormlaith. The brothers did not need to ask what had brought him. They heard the news up and down the seas, and they knew that there was trouble over there in Ireland. "Well, noble Sitric," said Ospak after a while, "we are honoured by your visit, yet it must have a purpose. What brings you to us from Dublin?" "War," said Sitric, looking from one to the other. "War, or the threat of war. King Brian, the most powerful king in Ireland, is threatening to make war on us and destroy Dublin. because we're allied with the Leinster men who oppose him. He's marching up through Ireland with a great army that keeps increasing in size as chieftains join him. The issue is sure to be decided by Easter this year. I have already been to see Earl Sigurd up north and asked for his help. He promised to come with a large force of his own men, as well as some Icelanders that are staying with him. But my mother Gormlaith tells me that that is not enough. We must have more allies to defend Dublin. She mentioned you both, Ospak and Brodir. And so I've come to ask you to come to Ireland and take me part. You'll have your rewards for it. Me brother and I will discuss it, said Ospak non-committally. We'll talk again tomorrow and tell you what we've decided. It'd been nightfall. Sitric got up and left them, going back to the port, accompanied by a few retainers he had with him. Ospak and Brodir sat in the darkness, looking into the flickering flames. Well, said Ospak softly, what do you think? Brodir grunted. We've heard all about this business in Ireland. News travels fast around these islands. This Brian is a great warrior, but it seems he means to push our people into the sea and take over Dublin himself. I'm inclined to say yes to young Sitric and go and help him keep the Irish king at bay or even defeat him. What do you say, brother? I have heard the stories from Ireland too, and I know about this Brian. He's a good man, a good king. He's been a warrior all his life, and now he's old. He means the best for his people. I say let him have Dublin. He's not an enemy of all our people there. He let them stay and trade as before. So you're not keen to go to Ireland and fight? No. Then I'm not keen either. I wouldn't like to be without you in the fight. They spoke no more of it, but turned in for the night. The next day, Sitric was back. He met Brodir and took him walking along the shore and among the sand dunes. We're not keen on going, Brodir said. It brings us no advantage and only trouble. Rely on Earl Sigurd and these Icelanders you speak of. But we must have you. My mother says you are two steadfast men, and we do not want to be without you in your band of warriors. I swear to you by Christ that I'll make it worth your while. How? Said Brodir doubtfully. There will be booty and spoils if we can defeat Brian, said Sitric. You'll get your fair share. And Brodir, I have heard that you're an unmarried man and no longer going to be a priest. By Christ, I don't hold it against you, though I'm a Christian like me mother. But you should have a wife, should you not? And if you'll join us, I can promise you me mother's hand in marriage. She's free now, and all Vikings have heard of the beautiful Kormlada, as I know you call her. He smiled and stroked his silken beard. Brodir looked at him troubled. This was something he hadn't anticipated. Perhaps this was just what he needed, a wife. It would put a good distance between himself and the church. Mind you, Sitric went on, the smile disappearing from his lips, you must tell this to no man. It will be a secret between us. Sitric had already promised Gormlaith's hand to Earl Sigurd. Of course, said Brodir, somewhat impatiently. But this evening I must talk to me brother again. If he'll come, I'll come, and there's me undertaking. Sitric was pleased and went on his way. Brodir went down to see Ospak. He was sitting at the campfire. Brodir sat down and looked across the flames at him. Sitric has been back and talked to me, said Brodir. He promises good rewards. I'm inclined to go with him now. But I said I must get your agreement, Ospak. I wouldn't like to go into such a battle without you. I told you, said Ospak, puzzled at this change in Brodir's attitude. I'll not go and fight against Brian. He's a good king. Sitric should make peace with him before he gets trounced. Brodir became suddenly angry. What's this? He exclaimed. Are you, a Viking, going to support an Irish Christian against your own? That would be a shame on our ancestors. Ospak scowled at this. Forget this foolish talk, Brodir, he said. Sitric is a Christian too. Earl Sigurd, his friend, also a Christian. And it wouldn't surprise me if Brian has Vikings in his pay. He'll know the measure of a good warrior. Will you not go then? No, and you'd be a fool to go too. Brodir leapt to his feet. I will go, with or without you. I'll stand with Sitric and Earl Sigurd, as a Viking should. You can stay and take your ease at the campfire. He laughed bitterly. Maybe you'll want to go and fight for this Brian, you seem to like him so much. And he stalked away to his own camp. Brodir had 20 ships and crews under his command, and Ospak had 10. Soon Brodir's crews were seen launching beached ships and fitting all of them out with sails at the entrance to the bay. But during the 3 nights they prepared for departure, they began to be troubled with terrible nightmares. Every single man dreamed the same dream. On the first night, Brodir and his men all dreamed that they were being covered with boiling blood, and when they awoke, they felt like their skin had been scalded. On the second night, they all dreamed that they were being attacked by unseen enemies with swords and spears, and there was a din of battle. On the third night, they dreamed that they were being attacked by a great flock of ravens, which pecked at them with their beaks. By the morning after this third night, Brodir had had enough. He took a boat and rowed back to Ospak's camp. Ospak was sitting at his campfire. They didn't say a word to each other. Then Brodir sat down, and they glowered at one another across the leaping flames. What ails you, brother? Said Ospak at last. Dreams, bad dreams, said Brodir, and I don't know what they mean. Dreams were always important to our people. With all this Christian book reading and Latin, I've forgotten how to interpret them. You were always good at telling the meaning of dreams. Tell them to me then, and perhaps the gods will inspire me with an insight into them. And so Brodir told him of the 3 dreams they had all had on 3 nights, the boiling blood, the clash of arms, and the fierce pecking ravens. Ospak frowned and thought for a long time. I'll tell you what I see, he told Brodir, but you must promise me to contain your anger if you don't like what you hear. I am your brother. I don't want to fight you. Very well, said Brodir sulkily. Go on, say what you will, and I'll listen and hold me peace. The boiling blood, began Ospak, means that where you're going, too much blood will be spilt in anger, your own included. Brodir said nothing, but just scowled across the campfire. The clash of arms, of spears and swords, said Ospak. Well, that means a greater, fiercer, deadlier battle than you or any of your men are expecting. It'll engulf you. So ask yourself, is this what you want? Brodir stirred with anger, as if to get up, but restrained himself. Go on, he said. The ravens, said Ospak softly. The ravens. The ravens are the totem beast of Dublin. Sitric has one on his flag. Aye, ravens. But you know what ravens do? When the battle's done, they gather overhead, swording and cawing, and then they come down and feast on the slain. They pick their brains, they pick their eyes, they pull out their intestines. Ospak's face was a mask of disgust. Brodir slammed his fist against the ground where he sat. It puts me in mind of a story the Irish have, Ospak went on. They had a great hero who defended a ford single-handed against an army of enemies. He took so many wounds, the ones that he could still be alive. They all hung back. No man dared attack him, and he still stood facing them. You see, he had staked himself out, disdaining retreat. There was a rope wound around him, and the stake he was leaning on. It was only when a raven flew down and perched on his shoulder that they knew at last he was dead. Brodir leapt to his feet. Enough of your stories, he roared across the campfire at his brother. No matter what dreams assail us, will not be put off. I have pledged Sitric to go and fight we shall. And you and yours had better not get in the way. I and mine will not try to stop you. As a matter of fact, we'll sail somewhere else, far from you and your ill-fated ships. You'll go nowhere, roared Brodir again. You'll stay where you are until we have left. I'll not let any of you out of the bay. If you try it, there'll be a battle here and now, before the battle in Dublin. He stalked angrily away, and Ospak heard the splash of oars as he pushed off in his boat. Now, that day, Ospak's men were busy preparing their own ships, loading supplies and dressing the sails. For Ospak had given the quiet word that they were to be ready to sail and put a distance between themselves and the vengeful Brodir and his men. Meanwhile, Brodir's ships were far out in the bay. Brodir told them to anchor end to end, and for the ones near the shore to attach cables to rocks there. That way, he expected to make a blockade and prevent his brother from sailing out before them. But during the night, Brodir's crews, free of nightmares now, slept the sleep of exhausted men. And during the night, Ospak made his move. His 10 ships sailed under cover of darkness to the entrance to the bay. Boats were put out to cut cables stealthily. This being done, Brodir's ships, with crews asleep, drifted together, and there was soon a gap big enough for Ospak's crews to sail past them and gain the open sea. When the morning sun awoke Brodir's men from their sleep, it took them a while to realise that Ospak's camp was gone and his ships had left. Cursing mightily, Brodir gave the order to leave the bay in formation and set a course across the Irish Sea for Dublin. Ospak also sailed across the Irish Sea, but further north. He disembarked his men on the coast and made contact with Brian's army, which was approaching from the west in an arc that would lead them to Dublin. Somewhere northwest of the city, the Viking warriors made their submission to Brian, and Ospak sank on one knee before the puzzled Irish king. On the eve of Palm Sunday, Earl Sigurd and a mighty force of 50 ships from the Northern Isles sailed into Dublin Bay. So, after a while, did Brodir's 20 ships. They all docked or anchored along the Liffey. And that night Earl Sigurd, Brodir and Sitric had a preliminary meeting so that the 3 leaders on whom the enterprise depended could get to know one another. The following morning, Palm Sunday, there was a solemn procession to the church, with the gospel reading out in the open, all about Christ's entry into Jerusalem, and Earl Sigurd and Sitric attended Mass along with Gormlaith. Brodir stayed away. All afternoon, Brodir had stayed in his camp, supervising things like the beaching of the ships and the setting up of tents. At sunset, he went off on his own, walking through the countryside. It had been a fine spring day, but it was cold, and now a damp mist was rising. He walked on. He was expecting something. Since he'd given up gospel reading and Latin chanting, his mind had become clearer, he thought. He was open to the magic of his ancestors for the first time in years. He wondered about his brother Ospak. Where was he now, he and his men? What was going through his mind? Was he, who had never been a Christian, open to the ancestral magic too? He wished they could be together now, trusting one another, helping one another, learning from one another the way they used to. He sighed. This would never do. He must put Ospak out of his mind. He must concentrate on the situation here in Dublin and what he could do to save the city for Sitric. And Gormlaith. He had seen her. She certainly was a beauty, though older than he was. What a thing it would be to win her. He walked on. He was expecting something, and it came. Out of the woodlands in the mist, a horse came galloping. It was a wild horse, or a horse without a rider anyway. It would have been hard to see in the gathering gloom, but it was a pale, whitish, sickly colour, this horse. Brodir thought that this must be a sign that it came from the other side, the world of dreams, the world of magic and divining the future. He called the horse. It paused and approached him, circling him cautiously. Finally, it came up to him. When he approached it, it shied away and kept its distance. He spoke to it, and it came back. He looked at the horse, and it looked at him, and then it neighed fiercely and reared up on its hind legs. But Brodir did not retreat. He stayed there and spoke to the animal reassuringly, hardly raising his voice. Finally, it came and stood beside him. He whispered to it now, and it stayed. It let him vault up on its back, and then it turned and began to trot into the woodlands. "So, spirit horse, you're taking me somewhere," said Brodir. "So be it." And he laughed. Taking its cue from this, seemingly, the horse increased its pace to a steady gallop. He let it have its head, just keeping a hand on its white mane. It took him up into the mountains, and all the time the mist was rising, so that he didn't know where he was, but he didn't care, because the horse knew. After about an hour and a half, they were riding across the brow of a mountainside. The horse's gallop had slowed again, and then the mist parted, and in the middle distance he saw a long, low wooden house with a sloped roof, but the kind that he knew from Viking settlements. The horse came to a stop and neighed softly. "So we're here now," Brodir said softly to the pale horse. "This is what I'm to see." The horse pawed the ground. After a few moments, he heard the thunder of hooves in the distance, and he saw 6 figures on horseback galloping in from the south. They arrived at the longhouse, quickly dismounted, hitched their mounts to a railing, and walked inside. It looked like 6 women. Then, while he was still wondering about this, he heard the thunder of hooves again. Now it was 6 more figures. He counted them, approaching on horseback, galloping in from the north. Again these arrived, dismounted, and went into the house. "They are Valkyries," said Brodir to himself. "But how can this be? In Ireland, and not in Norway or Iceland, where they belong? There must be Valkyries everywhere then. They must have come here for me, because I prayed the gods for something like this." The pale horse pawed the ground again. You have brought me to them, said Brodir to the horse. You're one of theirs. Is that it, my friend? The horse tossed his head and neighed softly. Then I must go to them, is that it? Wait here for me till I've done with them. Brodir had dismounted, and leaving the horse to graze on the dewy mountainside grasses, he approached the long house stealthily. He saw lights and heard the sound of voices. Aye, they were speaking Norse. These were the Valkyries who would tell him what he needed to know. He crept up to a window. He looked in. The 12 women were gathered around a huge weaving loom, bigger and cruder than any he had ever seen. They were also busy trying to weave sections of cloth on it and talking in low voices. A fire was burning in the central hearth, and lamps were lit. Brodir, one had looked up and clearly seen his face at the open window. Come in and see what we are doing. You will find it interesting. The others laughed. He needed no second invitation. He came around to the front and went in through the door, which was covered by skins. They all looked at him expectantly from where they stood around the loom. You have come to ask about Brian's battle, said the one who seemed to be the chief of them. We are weaving it now. Look. He came closer to the great loom. This is no ordinary loom, but a loom of death. Men's heads are the weights. He saw skulls with gaping eyes hanging from the frame. Men's entrails are the warp and weft. He gazed in wonder, and it was so, horrifyingly, for they were bloody pink serpents, it seemed, not threads or yarn. A sword is the shuttle. He looked, and there was a short sword entangled among the weaving. And the reels are arrows. He looked again, and there were the arrows too. This woof is woven with the entrails of men, said the Valkyrie in a louder voice, as if trying to pierce through the trance he was in. This warp is weighted with the skulls of dead men. All of what goes to make a battle. We are weaving it now. And once we have woven it, that is how it will be. For it is our task from the gods to choose what men will die and what men will live. Brodir looked at the thing in horror. Everything he knew about battles and fighting was coming to the surface in his mind. It was as if he could hear the clash of arms and smell the spilt blood from wounds. He couldn't take his eyes off it. You are winding it around and around, weaving a texture of death, he groaned helplessly. He looked then from one of the Valkyries to the other. Is there no hope then? They all shook their heads slowly. None really, said the Valkyrie who had spoken before. All that remains to be decided is how many will die and how many will be spared. Tell me about this, Brodir said hollowly, looking into the weaving. Who will win this battle? Whose will be the victory? It will not matter in the end. Then we will not win. I and Sitric and Sigurd. No. But Brian? What about Brian? Will he not win either? It depends upon the day you fight on. We have to choose the day then? Asked Brodir. Brian is a good Christian. They laughed hollowly. He does not want to fight on Friday. It is Good Friday, the day the God-man died on the cross. You know all about that. More hollow laughter. They knew all about him, but his curiosity made him ignore their mockery. Should we wait until that day then and force the issue? Will that make things better for us? No, not better for you, but worse for him. What do you mean? He will die. He will fall in the battle. How can he fall in battle if he will not fight? Find him where he is and kill him. Will it do us any good? Now. The 12 women were gathered around the loom closely now, and Brodir could see that they were weaving sections of the tapestry of death. Each one had her own bit to weave. These must be the lives and deaths of the warriors they were weaving. Will I come out of it alive? No, you are doomed, just like Earl Sigurd and the Icelanders he has with him, except for one. Good, said Brodir defiantly. Then I should be the one to kill Brian. I should take him with me. As you please, said a Valkyrie. We will weave that in. And Sitric? The young troublemaker. He will live to fight another day. And Gormlaith? What about Gormlaith? If she stays in Dublin, she will be all right. Good then, said Brodir, turning away from the loom slowly. But he stopped. One more thing, he said. Where's my brother Ospak? Another Valkyrie looked at the tapestry. Where he will do you no good, she said. The rest laughed. What? Exclaimed Brodir. Is he in the battle? On the other side? He will be commanding the Viking wing of Brian's army. Brodir cursed. The Valkyries laughed again. He looked at them angrily. And will he live to tell the tale? He will, said the Valkyrie, but he will mourn 2 sons. A curse on him, and on his sons. Now I've heard enough. Now I'll take me leave of you. I know we shall meet again. So we shall, said the leader of the Valkyries. No one was laughing now. He was almost at the door when he heard a sound of ripping. He looked back. The Valkyries were beginning to dismantle the tapestry. Each woman took her own section, tearing it down from the loom. He felt sick to his heart. He walked out without another word. He walked across the featherbed to where the pale horse was still waiting, champing the wet grasses contentedly, it seemed. It is done, Brodir said to the horse, as it looked up at him with sad eyes now. Let us be gone from this place. He slowly mounted the horse. He looked across to the longhouse. The women were leaving too. They mounted their horses and rode away, 6 to the north and 6 to the south, as they had come. Brodir's mount turned away now too, and began the descent from the mountain into the plain. When they were in sight of the Vikings' camp outside Dublin, the horse stopped. Thus far and no farther. Is that it? Whispered Brodir. Very well. You've done me good service. But I'll need you another night. He dismounted and headed for his camp. The pale horse galloped away into the darkness. The next day, Monday, there was another council of war. Brodir had had little to say at the first one, but he had plenty to say now. He told them, if this battle is held before Good Friday, Brian will win. So we have to wait till Good Friday, the day Christ died. That's the day the king must fall. Earl Sigurd frowned. How do you know this? I just know. I got the second sight. Don't ask me how. But I've been told the secrets of the battle. Earl Sigurd and Sitric looked at one another. They were church-going Christians, but they still had in their bones a respect for the old Viking ways of sorcery and divination. Can you tell us more? Said Sitric. Well, said Brodir, on Good Friday, Brian will not be willing to fight. He will send out his army under the leadership of others. He thought of Ospak with a start, but didn't want to mention him or think about him. Brian will stay behind in camp. There he can be killed by anyone who has the enterprise to do it. That alone will put paid to Brian's plans to rule Ireland as High King. And if we fight before then? Prompted Sitric wonderingly. Brian will take the field, leading his army. He'll be the rallying point of everything, like the army's banner. He's too old to do any fighting, but just being there in the thick of it, he'll be worth his weight in gold. Sigurd and Sitric looked at each other again. All right, said Sigurd. If it is as you say, and you seem to be in the know, we can wait until Good Friday. It will give us more time to prepare. Sitric nodded. Brodir had a certain urge to tell him to keep Gormlaith inside the walls of Dublin at all costs, but he didn't want to give away all he knew about the coming battle. The terrible truth that no matter what they did, they couldn't win against Brian. He would warn Gormlaith himself. This was going to be for Gormlaith, not for himself. He was doomed anyway. But yes, it would make him feel better. On Wednesday afternoon, there was a mist rising again, and Brodir knew this was his last chance. So he went out to the wood again, alone, at sunset, and sure enough, when it was getting to be dusk, the white horse came galloping out of the mist. Brodir laughed in spite of himself. He hoisted himself onto the horse's back, grasping his mane, and said, "This time, into Dublin." The horse galloped off towards the city, and the mists were all around. Brodir's long hair was loose, and it flew out behind him as they rode like the wind. Brodir crossed the ford of the Liffey, and no man stopped or challenged him when he entered the gates. That night, the people of Dublin heard galloping hooves in their hilly streets, and when they looked out, if they dared look out, they saw a rider on a pale horse, a rider with his hair streaming in the wind. The horse galloped in and out of the low mist, and they heard the sound of his hooves everywhere. It put fear into all who heard it that night, for they knew that great things were afoot this holy week, and this was a bad omen. Gormlaith was in her house on the hill, with all her servants and retainers. Sitric was not at home. He was out in the camps of the Vikings, spending the night in a tent with his own men and Earl Sigurd's. The servants and retainers heard the galloping hooves long before the sound got nearer, and they knew a horse and rider were coming up the hill, though they couldn't see them in the mist. The gates and the door were barred for the night. They watched uneasily as the shape of a pale horse and a rider with long hair streaming came out of the night mist. The man rode up to the gate. "Gormlaith! Gormlaith!" he cried. Gormlaith heard and went to the window upstairs that looked out over the entrance. "Who is there?" she called back. "One who loves you well, but not for long." "What news have you then? What's the matter?" "All is lost. The battle is already lost. There's no hope. But you, stay in Dublin. If you stay here in Dublin, you'll be safe, I can tell you." "How do you know these things?" "I am one who has been to the other side, where all the secrets are known. I have come back only to warn you. Be warned then. On no account go north near the battle. Do not flee south either. It is of no avail. Stay in Dublin." She gasped, and so did all the household listening. The horseman turned without a further word, and rode away on the pale horse into the mist. In the shocked silence, they heard his hoofbeats slowly dying away in the distance. The mist covered everything. The next day, which was Holy Thursday, Sitric came home from the camp. He told his mother, "We're going to fight on Good Friday, not before. There's a man there who has the second sight. His name is Brodir. He told us to fight on Good Friday and not before, and then the victory will be ours." "Who is this Brodir?" she asked wonderingly. "A Viking warrior, one of the two you told me to get from Doyle a Man. Remember?" "Ah, yes," she said. "There were two of them, two brothers. one named Ospak and one named Brodir, and they had a fine reputation as warriors and commanders of ships and men. So Brodir is here. What about the other one, Ospak? God knows. I just know that he decided not to join us, but Brodir did, and they had a great quarrel about it seems. Now Brodir will not talk about his brother. Sitric, she said, last night a man came here on a pale horse. Who was he? I have no idea, said Sitric. There are none of us in camp with horses. A stranger, maybe a ghost, he laughed. Then he asked, and he came here? Aye, he came here in the night. A man on a pale horse, with hair streaming behind him. He galloped all through Dublin before he came to us. He brought a message from the other world. Good God, said Sitric, and made the sign of the cross. What did he say? Did you hear it? She nodded. Hear it I did, because he called to me. He said that I should stay in Dublin no matter what happens. Well, that's good, said Sitric, somewhat puzzled. Did he say anything else? Sitric, she said suddenly, can't you stay out of the battle and let others fight? Not a chance, said Sitric, shaking his head emphatically. You told me to get Earl Sigurd and those two from the Isle of Man, and I got some of them. They're fighting for me, for us. I can't let them bear the brunt of the fighting and not lead out the men of Dublin to do their fair share. Sitric, said Gormlaith, this is all very well, and of course I understand. But if things go badly, you owe it to yourself and to me, and the people of Dublin, to fall back into the city and defend the place. He looked at her narrowly. Yes, he said. I know I have to defend Dublin. That's what I'm pledged to do since they made me king here. But I will go out with others to face Brian on Friday. I'll take one wing. Sigurd will be in the middle, and Brodir and his men will be on the other wing. But if things go badly, I'll fall back into Dublin and ready the place for a siege. I can promise you that. He paused and shook his head in puzzlement. But Brodir said nothing about things going badly, and he has the second sight. Brian's army was in camp near Clontarf, further up the coast. As the Dubliners were making no move, Brian and his officers realised by Holy Thursday that there would be no fight until Good Friday. God forbid that I should fight on Good Friday, he told them, the day my Saviour died on the cross. On such a day I shall not raise a sword in anger. Anyway, I'm too old to fight. But it seems that you must. Fight we shall, said Ulf, Brian's younger brother. You can stay in camp and pray for us. We'll put a guard around you. It is better so, said Turlough, Brian's foster son. If one of us is killed in battle, then so be it. But you are worth so much more than any of us. We couldn't afford to lose you, not at this stage, having come so far. So I pray you, stay in the camp as Ulf says. There was not much disagreement, so they decided that that was what they would do. On Good Friday morning, a guard was posted around the Clontarf camp and Brian's tent, which was on a hillock near a clump of trees. Then the army marched out. Ulf commanded one wing, Turlough had the centre, and Ospak was in charge of his own and all the other Vikings for Brian on the far wing. They could see the Dubliners coming. They were raising a cloud of dust as they marched out of their encampments to the north of the city. As Brian's forces advanced, they could see the Viking ships on the Liffey and out in the bay. Some of them were coming that way and would need to land by boat in Clontarf. Ulf and Turlough were already well briefed by Ospak as to what foreign forces Sitric would have at his disposal. Earl Sigurd and his men, and Brodir, Ospak's own brother. Ulf and Turlough, and Brian too, had wondered, hearing of the quarrel between the two Viking brothers, and how they were now on opposing sides in the battle. Ospak had not the heart to tell them that Brodir had been a Christian like themselves, but had rejected the cross of Christ. He didn't really understand it himself, and so resolved to keep his own counsel. When the two armies met, Earl Sigurd and his men were against Turlough and his Irish in the centre. Sitric met Ospak and his Vikings on one wing, and Brodir met Ulf and his Irish on the other wing. Turlough's men cut down the Viking advance, and they killed the standard bearer. Earl Sigurd called on one of the Icelanders who were with him, Thorstein, to bear the banner, and Thorstein was just about to lift the banner, but then a comrade of his, Asmund, blurted out with sudden prescience, "Don't take up the banner. Anyone who carries it will die." Earl Sigurd called on another man, Hrafn, to take up the banner. Hrafn looked at Asmund, who shook his head. "Carry your cursed banner yourself," answered Hrafn. Then Earl Sigurd said, "Well then, I suppose the beggar has to carry the bag." He stepped forward, tore the banner from its staff, and tied it around himself. It was a banner with a raven on it. Sigurd was a Christian, like Sitric was, but his banner too was the raven, the sacred bird of Odin. The fight began again in earnest. Asmund was killed first, and then Earl Sigurd, wrapped in his banner, was pierced through with a spear. Ospak had also carried the day on his wing, though he had been wounded and lost blood, and two sons of his had been killed. But Sitric and the Dubliners had not the heart for fighting, and eventually Sitric gave the order to retreat to Dublin. With the death of Earl Sigurd and the fall of the banner, his forces also turned and fled, hoping to make it out to their ships in Dublin Bay. All the Icelanders who were with Earl Sigurd had been killed, except Thorstein, who had not picked up the banner. He stopped to tie his shoelace. Turlough and his men came up with him. "Viking," Turlough taunted him, "why are you not fleeing with the others?" "Because," said Thorstein, "I can't get home tonight, since I am from Iceland." Turlough laughed at this, and so did his men. Turlough sheathed his sword. "Yield then, when you have your life." Thorstein did, and afterwards he joined Ospak's band. Brodir had made a fierce attack on Ulf's wing, and was making headway, but Ulf singled him out and landed 3 blows of his sword upon him. Brodir was saved by his fine suit of mail, but stunned with the blows, he turned and fled into the woodland. Seeing this, Brodir's men soon turned and fled too, for they were hoping to get to the shore and out to the ships. But they were mostly cut down as they fled, and the rest were drowned trying to get to the boats. Not a man was left. Brodir himself had rested in the woodland for a bit, and looking out, he saw that Brian's army were in full pursuit of the Dubliners. He cursed. But then he looked over at the camp, and saw a ring of shields around it, with some soldiers behind it. If only he could get through the wall of shields, he would have a chance of being the one who killed Brian. For he knew Brian had to die. That was what the Valkyries had told him, and everything had fallen out the way they had said. He gave it little further thought. Seizing his sword and shield, he ran over the trees, keeping low so that they wouldn't spot him too soon. He had the element of surprise. He broke through the wall of shields and made quick work of the soldiers who opposed him. He went to what must be Brian's tent, saw an old man who must be Brian, kneeling in prayer, and brought the full weight of his sword down upon him. Brodir ran out of the camp, but Turlough's men had turned back, saw him, and surrounded the clump of trees where he was. Turlough himself was there now, and he heard that Brian had been killed. He was cursing as Ulf came up too and heard the news. "It was Brodir," said Turlough helplessly. "He's in there now. We have him surrounded. He'll fight to the death. He knows he's finished." "No," growled Ulf. "We will take him alive." He ordered some of his men to cut down tree branches and bring them with them. Inside the wood, they surrounded Brodir in a clearing and threw the tree branches at him so that he was overwhelmed, fell, and was disarmed. Ulf could now take his revenge for his dead brother. "See that Ospak does not follow us," he growled to Turlough. "He would not like to witness this, to witness what I am going to do." Ulf and his men brought Brodir, a helpless prisoner now, to an oak tree on the edge of the camp at Clontarf. They pulled off his suit of mail. Wolf drew his dagger and cut open Brodir's belly. He pulled out one end of his intestine and nailed it to the trunk of the oak tree with his dagger. Brodir was groaning and collapsing, but they held him up. Then Ulf took him on one side and motioned to one of his men to take him on the other, and growled, "Forward, march." They forced Brodir to walk around the tree. His entrails came out as he walked and wound around the tree. His eyes bulged in horror. His cries came rattling from his throat. When the entrails were all out, Brodir was dead. They left him hanging from the trunk of the oak tree. "Now you have heard the whole story," said the Banshee, "and you know the meaning of the things you saw. For all the stories from all times in the past are here in the Foggy Dew. If you want to hear stories, this is where you will find them." "I'll remember," I said. "And it is time for you to go back, or to march onwards just as you please." She turned and walked ahead of me. I followed, but soon lost sight of her in the mist. I stumbled on for a few minutes, thinking I was lost after all, when I saw a figure walking ahead of me. I felt relieved. It was the Banshee again. But when I caught up with her and looked at her, I started. It was me father. He looked at me and nodded. He seemed very tired and old and grey, but he smiled slightly. "There you are," he said. "With this thick mist, I lost sight of you for a while." As we walked onwards together, the mist began to dissipate, and evening sunlight came through. I looked at my watch. It was 6 o'clock in the evening. We looked down into the valley, and it seemed to me all the way to Dublin and the Liffey, somewhere in the haze to the north of us. As we walked, I heard the Angelus bell tolling from a church in the distance. You have been listening to In the Foggy Dew by Turlough Con Me, from 13 Tales Told by a Dubliner. If you've enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, share and comment. And so, until next time.